This video is sponsored by Rocket Money. More on that later. 2019 was the year that I and many others got into emulation handhelds. My first might have been the BitBoy, a small Game Boy styled portable emulator that only played Game Boy and NES games, and that's it. That same year, I got my hands on the Pocket Go, which immediately blew the BitBoy out of the water. It was capable of emulating so many more consoles. Little did I know, this was a glimpse into the future. The Pocket Go was my favorite emulation handheld for a while. Even if I had another gaming handheld in my bag, this one was there too, because of just how tiny it was. It could just slip right in there. That was until the Miyoo Mini came out, which was cheap, ultra portable, and had better emulation quality and great custom firmware support. Now it's 2024 and we've got dozens of emulation handhelds. Miyoo just released the Miyoo A30, which is the successor to the BitBoy and the Pocket Go. I don't really understand how it's a successor because they're from different companies, but even the official BitBoy Twitter account is saying as much. I've had this Miyoo A30 for a while now, but I didn't want to make a video on it just yet because Anbernic also released a very similar device, the RG28XX. They're like basically the same thing on paper, so I wanted to pin them directly against each other. And here's the thing, this one runs bad, and then this one feels bad. It's amazing how far backwards we've come with these things. Now, a lot can be fixed with some custom firmware, but there just isn't any yet. Also, why are we relying on custom firmware? It should come good. It should come good already. It should come good. I do like the potential here. If you like the idea of a Game Boy Micro styled emulator and you want to just stick with Game Boy Advance games, maybe there's something here. If you're watching this months from now, maybe there's custom firmware options, but there's probably better hardware out there. This is going to be mostly a story of some remarkable failures. This video is sponsored by Rocket Money. I personally don't need any financing app. I've just been using my parents' guy for years. Hey kid, it says here you got 2 Netflixes. Do you need 2 Netflixes? I don't have 2 Netflixes. Oh wait, never mind. I'm just on your Netflix. Never mind. Keep doing. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower your bills, and manage your money better. It safely and securely identifies recurring charges and cancels unwanted subscriptions for you. You can even cancel from within the app with just a couple of taps. No need to worry about customer service calls. You got a lot of Ubers on here. You got Uber Eats, you got Uber Regular. That's it. After linking Rocket Money to all of my accounts, they notified me that they could save me money on my home internet bill. I just tapped sure, and within a few hours, they legitimately saved me around $100 on this year's home internet bill. Try it for yourself for free over at rocketmoney.com/wolfden, spelled just like that, or click the link in the description below, and you can unlock more features with premium too. Get it lower, get it lower, get it lower. Thank you so much. Oh, did you get it lower? No, not at all, but I'm using your upgrade and I'm getting myself an iPhone 15, baby! Hey, what's OnlyFangs? Is that like some sort of vampire website? Vampire Weekend? Well, I like the band. We'll start with the A30. It's capable of NES all the way through Game Boy Advance, N64, and even Dreamcast. Except, it is very bad at N64 and Dreamcast, so I'm not sure why those are included on here. It feels awesome. I do really like the horizontal form factor. The buttons are a decent size. The D-pad feels great. The shoulder buttons are horizontal, but they feel just fine. The thumbstick is a bit unnecessary, but I guess it's useful for N64 games, if you really wanted to play N64 games. I do like that it's recessed so the whole unit is still pocketable. I heard it needs to be calibrated, but after the calibration, it still doesn't go all the way to the right. Honestly, it would be a nice touch for N64 and Dreamcast games, but we're not going to be playing much of that on here anyway. This is a brand new device with brand new hardware, so it's not exactly just a horizontal version of a Miyoo Mini. There's more stuff going on in here. And because of that, this is brand new firmware. And that means there's no custom firmware just yet that you can put on here. So what you're gonna see in this video is what you're gonna get as of right now with the stock firmware that comes with the thing. And boy, do I hate it. Well, you might see this and assume it's a Game Boy Advance emulator. And if that's all you want it for, it might be just fine. It actually emulates Game Boy Advance pretty great with the default settings. The aspect ratio is true to original Game Boy Advance. It plays at a steady frame rate, which all shouldn't be too praiseworthy. There's a million devices that could do Game Boy Advance emulation well. We opened this video up with one that could have done it 5 years ago. It does have a fast forward button by default. Pressing R2 can help you speed through cutscenes or speed up your Pokemon battles, which is awesome. So this is like a $45, $47 Pokemon machine. And all of that is great. The problem is with everything else. I've heard that this has issues with SNES games. The clock speed is all messed up, and this also causes the audio to be just abysmal. By default, RetroArch has a 2x filter over the SNES games, which you need to manually remove, after which everything runs fine. But the speaker is still not great, and the scaling is still not the best. Turning on integer scaling fixes the scaling issues, but introduces a bit of slowdown. Not as bad as before, but it's still definitely noticeable. So I guess you gotta consider the trade-off. Consider never buying this thing at all. How about that? What's even more baffling is that this thing failed the Yoshi's Island test. At least at first. But then after just opening up the RetroArch menu and closing it again, it ran fine all of a sudden? Why are we even failing the Yoshi's Island test in 2024 at all? PS1 runs great. I'm not surprised. PS1 always runs great on these. I dove right into N64 with Perfect Dark, which is a very resource-heavy game. It just crashes, completely unplayable. And Mario 64, which is not a resource-heavy game, just... No, thank you. No, thank you. Don't forget, this thing is also supposed to be able to run Dreamcast games. It looked like it did for a hot minute. I was a bit surprised after that N64 performance, but then after the game loaded, it's unplayable. You can't rely on Dreamcast games. Adding your own ROMs onto this thing is also a bit weird. You just pop the micro SD card out, pop it into your computer, and you can move your ROMs into the folders just like you would on any other handheld emulation device. But the Miyoo A30 doesn't immediately read those ROMs when you pop the micro SD card back into the device. I had to actually break out the user manual. That's a new experience for me. I've never done that before. Turns out on the home screen, you have to press the home button and then select refresh ROMs. The UI is just overall not ideal. This is why I like waiting for custom firmware on these. It usually fixes the UI, but also makes all of the emulation cores run better and gives them settings by default that most people would prefer. Unfortunately, the Miyoo A30 doesn't have any custom firmware as of right now, and I'm not sure if it'll ever get that custom firmware. This is a fine device if all you want to play is Game Boy games and like that's it. But the original Miyoo Mini can also do that, and you can put Onion OS on it, which is way better than the stock firmware. It can't do N64, but I'd argue neither can this one. There seems to be more custom firmware support for Anbernic devices than there are for Miyoo devices. But even for this 28XX, there is no custom firmware out right now. There's some, but they're in alpha. They're not exactly ready for prime time yet. So we'll move on to reviewing the stock firmware of the RG28XX. They sent me probably the ugliest color that they have. It comes in other colors, and this one is for sure the grossest. By the way, these were both sent to me by keepretro.com. The Anbernic does not feel as good as the Miyoo. They're relatively the same size, but the clicky shoulder buttons are small. In fact, All the buttons are small. There's so much room. What made them think making everything this small was a good idea? It makes the whole unit feel way cheaper, too. The first game that I booted up is Sonic Advance 3 for Game Boy Advance, because again, people are probably gonna get this as a Game Boy Micro replacement. Well, it runs slow. The frame rate is bad. Also, the aspect ratio for Game Boy Advance games, by default, is wrong. But then I realized that there are two different ways to launch games on this thing. If you get one of them for yourself, never ever launch games from the tab labeled Game Rooms. Load them from the second tab called RA Game. The fact that I even have to tell you that should be enough to tell you that the original firmware is god-awful. Game Boy Advance from the RA Game tab is fine. It runs at the full frame rate and everything, but the aspect ratio is still wrong. And there's a lot of tomfoolery you have to do to get it to the right 3:2 aspect ratio here. The screen on here, for some reason, is natively portrait, so the firmware flips everything 90 degrees. This fucks up the RetroArch setting somehow. So I had to do math, which sucks, and these are the settings that you need to use to get GBA to stretch correctly. I'll admit I spent a long time testing a lot of different systems, launching them from the wrong tab. So I came in really hating this thing. But then I learned of that second tab and started launching games from there. Yoshi's Island ran fine from the RA Game tab. PS1 is also fine from both tabs. N64 is a little slow, but honestly not so bad. There is no thumbstick, so it's a bit weird playing N64 games on here, but the D-pad works okay as a thumbstick replacement. Obviously, this unit does not have enough buttons to be playing N64 games, but sometimes emulators will give you a modifier button that changes the face buttons to act like C buttons. This console uses R2 for that modifier, and it works kind of awesome. Holding R2 basically gives you dual analog support for Perfect Dark. It's surprisingly intuitive, but then my gun wasn't going full auto for some reason, as if there was a problem with R1. I'm not sure what the hell that's about. Dreamcast was once again pretty disappointing. There's no thumbstick, and the D-pad isn't mapped to thumbstick inputs. I tried a bunch of stuff. The forced analog option did not work. Mapping the D-pad to thumbstick buttons did not work. It's like amazing that they could release a device like this and just not test it. Like, what the f? Regardless, I think I might like the Anbernic a little bit more than the Miyoo. I still hate the original firmware on here, but at least it plays most systems a little bit better. I don't like the physical hardware, and I don't like the default aspect ratio for Game Boy Advance stuff. So if you just want to play Game Boy Advance stuff, then you might consider the Miyoo A30. I have to keep reminding myself that both of these are under $50. So this is a budget option to play up to N64, but you're gonna be using a device that could barely play N64. You're paying a low price, but there's a reason why it's cheap. Now, there is some custom firmware for the 28XX that's in alpha. Black Seraph is working on getting Garlic OS over to the 28XX, but I couldn't get the alpha on here. It wouldn't work. And other people on Reddit also couldn't get it to work. So I think that's a little broken right now. If we've learned anything from past consoles, we can assume that the Miyoo A30 probably isn't going to have much better performance in N64 or any of that with custom firmware. We can also assume that the Anbernic 28XX will probably have more custom firmware support, maybe some more robust options, but don't get either of these things in the hope that they will eventually get custom firmware. Wait for that custom firmware to come out, wait for people to make videos, and then get the one that you think is right for you. Because that custom firmware could just never come out. And that's the thing that's so mind-boggling about these devices. The hardware is cool. Why, after so many releases, is your firmware still so bad? You didn't even try Dreamcast on here before releasing it? Look at the custom firmware community. Why do people want to put their own firmware on here so bad? It's because yours sucks. Learn from what they do and put it into your own. The original Anbernic RG28XX now ships with Garlic OS. They just straight up gave up on their own firmware. The RG28XX Plus is capable of emulating more consoles, but the firmware is still bad, and there still aren't that many custom firmware options out there right now. For those reasons, I am still recommending the RG35XX original over everything else at this price range. It's unfortunate because I know a lot of people would prefer a horizontal form factor. I love the idea of a Game Boy Micro styled Miyoo device. This is a sick Game Boy Advance emulator and nothing else. So much potential locked away for no good reason. It's amazing that both of these companies got things so right recently and then took major steps backwards. Imagine if Nintendo released the Switch 2 and it was worse in every way than the Switch 1. That would be laughable. This is laughable. So what do you guys think about these horizontal emulation handhelds, the Miyoo A30 and the Anbernic RG28XX? I hate these names. Anbernic already announced a clamshell version of the 35XX. They're just plowing through them. I don't know why anybody would want these horizontal ones over just a regular 35XX. Maybe so they can dabble in N64 with no thumbstick and at a slower clock speed. Get literally anything else. Anyway, leave in the comments below. Add me on Twitter and in all this other social media garbage. Thank you, Rocket Money, for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check them out at the link in the description. Maybe it'll save you some money on some stuff. You should check out wolfdenapparel.com for that desk mat that you might have seen throughout this video. Of course, the most important thing that you can do to help support this channel is just subscribe right here and share this video with a friend. A friend who was thinking about getting one of these. Tell them no. Thank you very much. Have yourself a good week.